Have you ever sat down and wondered just how many riffs on George Orwell's 1984 might be out there in the world of literature, cinema, say video games? I would imagine it's quite a lot. Well, we're going to deliver one to you, at least secondhand, through discussion in this episode. I'm with the Hugonauts, who run a podcast on science fiction nominated for the Hugo Awards, and we'll be talking about a book that has nothing to do with the Hugo Awards, actually. It's a novella. It's Huang Fan's Zero. So he's a Taiwanese author writing this one in the 80s, I believe. And it's a sort of a version of 1984, and it's set in a dystopia that is hard to really define, but I'm going to say it's defined by the fact that it's a dystopia of the computer age. That's the technology that sort of defines the world and kind of runs the system, but it goes a lot deeper than that, and we'll get into that. So yeah, glad you've tuned in. Hope you'll enjoy the chat. But before we get to the chat, we're doing the news, the translated Chinese fiction news, which I lovingly call the Trichofik news. So there's 5 items this time. I'll try and speed through them. First thing, it's something you can read. It's by the author Cao Ko. It's up on Asymptote, a journal for translated lit and poetry. It's called The Wall Builder. I have not read it, but it's pretty short. It's a short story, and it is about a guy way back sometime in historical China, and he's building the wall. He's one of the workers on the Great Wall. So that's that. There's a link to that in the show notes in the news items section. Next one, also not massive news. It's a book I think I've mentioned before in the news segment. Tan Xue's Mystery Train, the translation of New Tan Xue book. That's now available for pre-order if you're in the States. Pretty exciting. Third news item. See, I'm really getting through them. It's Yang related news. She's tweeted that she's nearing the end, like the final, penultimate, probably ultimate by now, chapter of a Chinese language novel that she's been writing. And this one she's been writing for she's not been writing it, it's been tormenting her, she says, for 7+ years. So I guess don't keep your eyes on that. Keep your ears peeled for more about that. Okay. Fourth of our 5 news items. This is for all you people who love to read academic essays. The SFRA review, the science fiction, and I've forgotten what RA stands for, journal, have published a paper by one Xi Liu, and it's called Stories on Sexual Violence as Thought Experiments, Post-1990s Chinese Science Fiction as an Example. I guess the title is pretty self-explanatory. Some of the authors that are name-dropped in the opening, we've got Han Song, Chen Qiufan, Wu Chu, Zhao Haihong, Chu Hui, all authors that I guess have dealt with sexual violence in their stories. So again, it's not something I've read. I can't tell you what to expect, but I can tell you that's up online for free. Links in the show notes. Okay, last news item. Now this one is pretty damn interesting. This is another thing that I've just linked to a tweet thread. It's by, I guess, friend of the pod, Michael Cannings, one of the publishers who runs Camphor Press. They published The Fox Spirit at Bluestone Mountain that we covered recently on the show. Michael has done a tweet thread about something kind of odd he's noticed on Amazon. There's been a big push of like very sloppy looking, low quality books he's put in quote marks about Taiwan, or specifically like the Taiwan-China-US relationship. A lot of them have Nancy Pelosi in the titles because he's screenshotted some examples. Nancy Pelosi has just visited Taiwan at the time of recording this episode. So yeah, something funny is going on. Like, these books have spelling mistakes in authors' names. They look really like they've been slapped together, full of grammatical errors and what have you. And Michael's commented on that in his tweet thread. It seems curious, shall we say. Right, that's all my news items. Like I said, I think I got through them quickly. So on to the discussion. You're going to hear me talking to the 2 Hugonauts about Huang Fan's Zero. So on the show, we have the Hugonauts. First question, who the hell are the Hugonauts? Who are you guys?
Brent and I are friends from high school who both love to read science fiction. So we decided to make it a little more serious of a project, and we've just kind of started the ball rolling, and it snowballed to where we are today, just making episodes about review and discussion about science fiction novels and short stories. And we're trying to like normalize science fiction a little bit and introduce more of the good stuff into the zeitgeist and get people reading the best science fiction.
Yeah. And who are you?
Who am I? I'm still trying to figure that one out, to be honest.
I meant Cody for not even saying like, I'm Cody, I do this, but that was great too.
And I'm a production audio professional. I work in like film, TV, movies, doing post-production and production sound, on location sound. And so that's my job on the podcast. I do all of our media. And then we got Brent.
Yeah. This has been such a fun project and a great excuse to meet like lots of fun people. Talking with you, I guess, has been great, and listening to your stuff. I'm so happy we got introduced. But there's this like, been reading sci-fi for so many years, but doing this has like opened us up into this whole world of like other people who care so much about this. There's not, I feel like the concentration of people who love sci-fi is a little too low to like meet people a lot in the real world day to day. We're like, oh, I love this thing too. But entering this world of like people who are so enthusiastic about this has been so fun and such a good way to meet people who like, take this stuff kind of seriously and look at it for the great art it is. So anyway, yeah. And then for my part, I'm Brent Gaisford, and I am a data scientist who works on brain-computer interfaces. So yeah, that's me.
Right, and we owe it to, speaking of other people, we owe it to Keith, right, that we're all speaking? No, it's not Keith.
Adam.
Shit, it's Adam. All right,
Adam McMurtry.
We owe it to Adam. And
okay.
it's to Adam that it's because of Adam that I know Keith. But yeah, so you guys spoke with a former guest on the show, Adam McMurtry, right?
Yeah, we talked to him. He came on to our show to talk about Three Body when we did our episode on Three Body Problem, and just he's been so great to talk with over sort of the lifetime of the show. One of our the people who like emails us a lot and always comments to let us know what they think about the episodes. It's been wonderful to get a chance to meet him. So yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Adam's the best. Hi, Adam.
Yeah, he probably is listening. So hello, Adam, and Keith, if you're listening, I apologize. So I think that maybe gives it away then that we're not going to be talking about Three Body Problem. In fact, we're not even going to be talking about any sci-fi from mainland China. This is actually Taiwanese sci-fi we're going to be talking about. It's going to be, I think, the third time or even fourth time I will have done Taiwanese sci-fi on the show. Something I never could have predicted having gone in. But anyway, this one is Zero by Huang Fan. And full disclaimer, I did a Taiwan season a while back on the show, and I wanted this novella to be in it, and I actually couldn't find anyone. A lot of people said, oh, you should do Huang Fan, put him in your Taiwan season. But then when I was looking for people who'd actually read the guy's stories, I couldn't find anyone. So we're getting to this one a little bit late, but I'm just glad that you'd like to talk about it. I wanted to ask you guys on that point, what is your general experience or perspective on Chinese language sci-fi, or even just sci-fi from Asia?
I guess I could start. We don't know a lot about it. Like I was saying in the when we were chatting before, I've read Monkey, Journey to the West, and some various other things here and there, but the only Chinese or even Asian science fiction I've ever read is the Three Body Problem trilogy, and it was definitely cool and a different experience learning. I was also an English major, a lit major, and it was interesting experience reading something in translation from Chinese and trying to suss out like what was a cultural difference and what was a difference in terms of like literary style, and then what was the difference in like the actual writing ability, and
what was the translator as well.
Yeah, and what was the part of the translator, and it it's a very different cultural feel as a novel, and I really enjoyed the experience. Three Body has kind of stuck with me. I think it does with a lot of people, like over time, I think about it more and more, and it applies to more and more lit I'm reading and just like everyday things. It's really entered my brain.
Yeah, I was actually remembering something recently where I was looking through Twitter and some account, it was a Hugo's account actually, some Hugo's focused Twitter account had blocked me, an account I'd never interacted with. And I asked about that, and I think it was a show listener who told me, oh yeah, this account is blocking everyone who follows so-and-so other account. And my reply was, well, this is great. This is the three-bodification of Twitter. Preemptive shielding from everyone else. And yeah, without having read that trilogy, I wouldn't be able to make that reference or frame it in that particular way. So I really do get what you mean there. Brent, did you have any perspective you wanted to share there?
I would just say I think that I'm excited about what you're doing, and I'm excited about the sort of the doors that Three Body has opened, because, you know, I got into sci-fi because my grandfather was like a, you know, sci-fi fan, and so that sort of went through my mom and then on to me. So I was reading, you know, I grew up reading like the stuff my grandfather said was great. So I was reading like a lot of Heinlein and Asimov, you know, when I was really young, and just there's not a lot of stuff in translation. And from what I understand, they're also, and you can say a lot more about this than I, but I don't think there was a lot of, I think sci-fi started in the East later than it started here. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. However, there was a really interesting period in, I think it's the late Qing, they call it, so the end of the last Chinese dynasty, basically. So the first decade of the last decade of the 19th century, first decade of the 20th century, when a few Chinese writers inside China were having a go at writing sci-fi. And there's a book you can read on that called Celestial Empire, I believe it's. Let me consult with Google so that I'm not misleading everyone. Yes, Celestial Empire, The Emergence of Chinese Science Fiction by Nathaniel Isaacson. And that is essentially just a sort of a close read, an overview of a few of, I think all or most of those stories that exist. So for example, there's a sci-fi sequel to one of China's 4 literary classics, The Dream of the Red Chamber, in which the main character is brought into future, I think it's future Shanghai or future Beijing or something, and he flies around on an amazing flying machine. But then as the century wore on, sort of more secular realist politics dominated literature. So you get nothing until the 30s. Then there's this book, Cat Country, which I've covered on the pod, set at a time when China was really in dire straits. And it's about a Chinese man who travels to, I forget if it's the moon or, I guess it's Mars, not the moon. And it turns out that on Mars, there is this whole civilization of cats. But it's in the one particular cat country that he visits is in decline. And it's a great big metaphor for the China of the 30s. But after that one outlier, there's nothing. Then comes the revolution. And you get, I think in the 50s and 60s, some kind of Soviet-style educational sci-fi for children, but nothing of really great literary merit, at least that I've heard of. Then in the 80s, you do get the first sort of...
We get Zero.
Wave. Yeah, although that's Taiwan. I don't really know if there's much... That's a whole other story. I have no idea what Taiwanese sci-fi there was. Probably not that much, because as far as political freedom goes, after the Chinese Civil War, Taiwan and the PRC are actually weirdly similar in that they both sort of opened up in the 80s in their own ways. But yeah, from the 80s onwards, you get sort of the first emergences of sci-fi in mainland China. But as for like what the scene is in Taiwan, I couldn't really say. I guess it's a much smaller country, so it's harder to say what the scene would be. Like if you ask me, what's the Scottish sci-fi scene? I'd be like, I don't know. There's only 5 million of us, so how much of a scene can there be versus like in America or England or Europe or something?
Right, population, and also like where the population is economically too. Of course, like if they have the freedom to focus on the arts.
So it's interesting to hear though that sort of the floodgates basically started to open in the 80s, because in the West, like nothing broke through till Three Body, right? And so I think now like the doors are open. People are ready for more, and I think more is getting translated.
Yeah.
Plus, we've got like Chinese American authors who've gotten quite famous, obviously, and are writing great stuff. So anyway, I'm excited to read more, and this was a great excuse to read something that was fun, and it felt like it's interesting. This book was from the 80s. It felt like Western sci-fi from like the 20s or 30s. Like, it's super Orwellian. I know we're going to talk about that. But I think that reflects sort of what life was like in Taiwan at the time. But yeah, it was really fun and interesting, and it felt like a cultural experience as well. I think I've never been to East Asia. It's like one of my biggest, I gotta do some traveling there. It's the place in the world I've got to go. But between this and Three Body, I feel like it just feels different, in a way that I'm excited to like actually go and experience and see how much like the literature is translating into like. I can see some patterns in things a little bit that make me feel like traveling there would be an elucidating experience. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I do think if you go to one of China's tier 1 cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, maybe, I wouldn't want to be too cartoonish and say they're sci-fi cities, but I think you will see the future arriving there in a way you won't see it arriving in, say, most of the UK, or if any of the UK or in the US. Like the example I would jump to first, that academic Nathaniel Isaacson I mentioned is really interested in his rail travel. China has an amazing fast rail network. Here, the town I'm in England, Knutsford, was going to be a site where the UK's first fast rail network would have been built through, but that's been like tabled for something like a decade now. Future is not arriving very quickly here, but I think all of us know future is arriving. Some form of the future is arriving out there in China, and of course, it's probably true for a lot of East Asia. Maybe not Japan. I guess Japan has something in common with the West in that it's sort of what's the word? In a bit of a limbo.
Yeah, limbo's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, thus ends the geopolitical analysis section of the episode. I'll move us on. Do we want to introduce the plot of the story?
Yeah, Brent's your guy on that. He's our summary man.
Perfect.
So you two take a whack at it.
Okay. So I would say it's set in the, I don't know, it's framed as the near-ish future, but the important invention that's occurred is like, it's not clear what it is. Some kind of chemical energy. A thing got invented that replaced all energy needs, as well as it seems to be able to like remotely trigger nuclear weapons. Anyway, so there's this thing that has solved all the world's energy problems, and with the invention of that thing came the party that controlled it and the totalitarian state that took over the entire world. And it's mentioned in the first few pages casually that it committed mass genocide, and like all of the southern hemisphere basically is gone, and just like casually gets dropped in the first few pages, and then you have to sort of wonder about that for quite a while before it gets revealed what's going on. And there's a young man who maybe doesn't feel entirely comfortable with this totalitarian system and is trying to figure out what's going on. And I don't know. It gets pretty strange from there. How far should we take it? I guess. What else would you say about it?
Yeah, we should have asked before. On our show we don't do spoilers. Do you just go for it, or do you?
I usually go for it.
All right.
If I'm bringing on an author or a translator who's recently brought out a translation, I do them a favor and don't spoil it. But for me, it's a novella. It's from a long time ago. We're about to say it follows a similar trajectory to 1984.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a spoiler to say how 1984 ends. They overthrow the government. It's great.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. One guy defeats the empire.
I guess I can drop a couple names. So our guy is called Xi De. Maybe he's related to Xi Jinping of today. Who knows? And the magical device is called Nanning. But Nanning, I find that one interesting because that doesn't mean anything in English. So one might assume because it's got a Chinese name, or seems to have a Chinese name, it's a Chinese invention. But we get hints later on that US orbital weapons could have been Nanning or be part of the Nanning system. So I think it is worth saying that whoever has the organization or the movement or the group that's taking control aren't they're like a global elite, I think. They're not pinned down to like Taiwan or anywhere. They're not necessarily pinned down to the US, although it's hinted the US might have taken a leading role there.
The main guy, Max Christen, is Swiss,
Yes.
right? Or purportedly. So
Yeah, so there's a and there are like definitely some strains of like how would I say this, like Euro slash Germanic supremacy in there. There's a lot of talk of how like I'm not what's the word? I'm not trying to put words onto the page that aren't there, but it says like the lesser races or something.
The inferior races. Yeah, it's a very
strong
you know,
words.
that's like Nazi language. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's eugenic, fascist, racist language, and it's right in there. But yeah, the thing I wanted to say as a PRC head is that the leading group aren't referred to as a party, which is interesting because certainly in China, in the PRC, the ruling group are the party. The party is almost synonymous with the government. No one else has the power.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
did that feel different to you? Because aren't they the committee? To me, that's all the same. As a Westerner, I'm like, the party, the committee, it's all the same thing. There's the guys who are in charge.
there's no connotation for us.
Yeah, a party would have an ideology and a jargon that goes with that ideology. So whether or not the Chinese government are Marxist, the Marxist language is part of how they communicate their ideas, often at great length and poor concision. And 80s Taiwan, I don't think ideology was quite such a big deal. Nationalism was the sort of government's binding tool, but it was the KMT. It was a one-party state, whereas like whatever world we're in now, the idea of a party is sort of gone. It's a more faceless, I don't know what you call it, bureaucratic elite. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I thought that was worth mentioning, that there's no party like there is in 1984. There is a ruling organization, but they don't call themselves a party.
No, that's a nice like connotation to add that we don't. I mean, I guess we do have it a little bit in the West. You know, like in America, Democratic Party, Republican Party, you wouldn't call those committees, but it doesn't have as strong of a like subconscious connection as it does.
Well, there's some unelected parts of your system that have been making some noise recently.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll leave that one dangling.
Yep.
I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else in the plot is worth mentioning. I guess we could spell out what makes it similar to 1984. So we have this guy. He's dissatisfied. He has a creeping dissatisfaction that something's not quite right. A bit like that itch in your head that's described in The Matrix. The itch you can't scratch.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
He has a dream or some sort of strange experience that leads him to pick up a book written by a guy called Winston. And this is after he's had some conversations with a professor who's sort of danced around saying anything really explicit, but has told him, look, this society, especially its founding, is not quite what you think it is. Have you considered that some things are missing? And the book he picks up by this guy Winston, which is a direct allusion to the name of the main character in 1984, tells basically more of the origin story of this society that you described. That there was this weapon, Nanning, that used mass murder and wiping out something like 90% of the human population to set the whole thing up. And I guess from there, he becomes more and more uncomfortable. His superiors notice, and they sort of send him through a process of like demotions, holidays, faraway postings to see if he can perk up. And he doesn't perk up. He gets more disillusioned. He's yearning more for something more human, because it's a very, we haven't got into that, but it's a very rationalistic, dehumanizing system that everyone is living under. And I guess I won't outright spoil the ending, but he's heading down a dangerous road.
Yeah, and the committee, it felt, so one of the things that I really, when I first picked this up to read it, you suggested it, and I just started reading it. I didn't read anything about it. So I sort of assumed it was fairly modern. And so as I was reading, I was like, oh, this is a criticism of, this is a Taiwanese person criticizing the Chinese Communist Party and their sort of totalitarian observation of everyone through digital media, and the fact that like there's so little room to have any free expression, and if you express anything in mainland China, there's a good chance the government is watching you, because the government in the committee, I guess, in this is so, it turns out they have everything under such a tight lens. Like the rebellion that he thinks that he's joining is in fact just an effort of the Central Committee to expose these rebellious people so they can deal with them. And so it felt that way to me. And then after I finished reading and went back and read the introduction, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. As a person who was born in the late 80s in the West, I always heard like, oh, Taiwan's, is the free democratic state. This was sort of an excuse for me to do a little Wikipedia binge down the history of Taiwan, to see, oh my God, this was... it
wasn't nice.
Things were different. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So we were saying how reading Three Body Problem changed our view of the world forever. Living in China changed my view of the world forever. Opened my eyes up to all sorts of things. So, like, I think I had known prior to going out there that during the Cold War, we had, I guess I didn't know about Taiwan, but I knew, okay, there was a North Korea and there's a South Korea. They went to war. So I guess one was on the Western side, so it must have been free, capitalist, and a US ally. And then the other one was not free, communist, and a Soviet Union ally. But actually, no, South Korea, it's the same deal. That was a right-wing authoritarian state until, I think, around the 80s as well, when it, through the struggle of the people who lived there, fighting for their own freedom, they turned it into a democracy. It was not through, benevolent Uncle Sam that South Korea became democratic. And with Taiwan, it's a very similar story. The West and the led by the US was happy for it to be a nationalistic right-wing dictatorship because it was opposed to communism, basically. It was a counterweight. And no one flipping tells you that in school in the UK.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that. But for the record, South Korea and Taiwan are great. Like the bets paid off in the long run. I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to push back a little bit. I'm very glad that Korea is not all North Korea. You know what I mean? Like it's so much worse to live in North Korea.
For sure. But my point is there, I certainly wasn't told. Not that the duty of my school was to teach me this stuff, but that information did not reach me until I went all the way out there and took more of an interest.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Keeping us moving along. I thought we could talk a bit more about the context the book came from and also the context of the author's life. So the edition we read this thing in was from the Columbia University Press, who do a lot of really interesting stuff from Chinese and other Asian countries in translation. So it's an academic book. So being an academic book, we have to have an academic intro that tells you like what this author was doing. And surprise, surprise, he wasn't just a science fiction writer. He was like a highly regarded literary author in Taiwan. And I think at times the intro tells us he was like the guy in the literary scene. And he wrote in all sorts of different styles. In what you might call a bit of a case of unreliable marketing, the book is called Zero, and it has a very sci-fi looking cover on the front. But the story we read is just the second half of the book. It's this novella, and before that we have, I think, 3 short stories, and they're all in really different styles. So like this was a guy that did lots of stuff and just had a bit of a sci-fi turn in his career. I think that's worth saying, because I didn't think it showed up very much in the story Zero, aside from I don't know, it felt like he didn't have an intricately planned out hard sci-fi story.
Yeah, I think it almost felt like he saw a lot about what he felt like he loved 1984 and it had a lot of messages that meant something to him. So he wanted to take it into the modern, the 80s, the modern day for him, and make a new, more relevant version for his life experience. And it's also interesting to me that, we just did an episode on The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, which is a short story from 1909 that's super science fiction. But E.M. Forster was famous for like Room with the View, A Passage to India, like these kind of classic British taught in schools novels, and then he wrote this one dystopian science fiction story. So maybe, I don't know, it's a thing among the writers that at some point, some of them just get interested in telling more science fiction, like speculative history, speculative future story, and thinking about something beyond the kind of the more classic mundane literary fiction. But it also it did surprise me, and I'm interested to hear what you think about like the actual writing style of this story, because it almost surprises me a little bit to learn that he's a literary author, because I loved the story and I loved the plot and it kept me going along, but it felt like a young writer's like initial attempt almost at like the, just kind of goes. The characters don't have too much definition. The writing seemed kind of basic to me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, same. It's definitely true that there's not many striking thoughts. The thought to me is more in the sort of the world. I also kind of felt the translator wasn't the best. So this can be a problem in translated Chinese fiction in general, is that a lot of the places that are able to get funding to produce these books are academic publishers or even academic papers, because they don't use a completely commercial model. So if the thing doesn't sell, and translated fiction often doesn't sell very well, doesn't matter. It doesn't have that commercial imperative. So academic translators, if you were to stereotype them, they're great at translating for accuracy, but not necessarily for translating to create engaging fiction prose.
To translate the feel.
Yeah. And Chinese as a language is not like, say, French to English. They're very closely related. So like translating literally from French to English, like a novel, might produce fairly readable prose. But Chinese and English are so different, aside from the fact that they're from different sides of the world and aren't related to each other. One uses a character system, one uses the alphabet. So there needs to be some sort of creativity and interpretation to produce nice, lively prose. And I think it's no wonder that a lot of the best selling stuff from Chinese to English is translated by people who also write novels. So 3D Body Problem is a great example of that, because Ken Liu, who did 2 of those books, is an author himself. He knows how to write. So that means when he's rendering Chinese into English, he can make it read well. And I felt that there was quite a lot of awkward sentences in the book, and we can't blame that on the author. I would point the finger at the translator for that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. I never know when I'm reading some of this stuff, because like you said, I've read a lot of I think mostly it's like South American and Mexican authors, like a lot of stuff that's been translated from Spanish, and then I've tried to read some of those in original Spanish, like Vargas Llosa or Garcia Marquez, and it translates really well and easily, like you said, because the languages are similar, and also there's like a cultural sharing that's like, oh, they're a little different here and here, but I can understand like family. The family dynamic in Latin America versus the family dynamic I'm used to is like, it's not that steep of a bridge to cross. And so I'm always wondering with like 3 Body and with Zero, like what is translator, what's not.
And I think also for, like you said, culture is a thing. The best, to me anyway, the best translators from Chinese to English have a foot in both cultures. So like I said, Ken Liu, he's Chinese American, so that's a big head start. Another translator who I think is really great is Jeremy Tiang. He's Singaporean. Singapore is a country that has a foot in Chinese and Western culture. Not to say that you can't be, I don't know, say Scottish with 0 Chinese DNA and not be good at the thing. But if you haven't lived there,
Right.
at least for a while, and if you haven't spoken to lots of Chinese people and studied the culture, then like, how could you possibly be at the top tier for translating this stuff?
Yeah, even at like the level of like there's so much connotation, right? Like about party, just even that thought is like a high level core concept that's like, okay, this means something different when he's writing party and than it might to you. So how do we translate that?
Yeah, and you could be the world's biggest brain genius, but if you just haven't happened to have been in the right place to get that understanding of the idea. It will never occur to you. It doesn't matter how smart you are.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could probably rag on about this for a while, but
We could rag about anything for a while, right?
last thing I'd say about the other stories in the book that's worth mentioning is that although they're very different, politics is a running theme. I've forgotten the name of it, but the first story in that collection, it's apparently, according to the intro, acclaimed as being one of the first really interesting political stories in Taiwan. Because I think I don't. Listeners might want to correct me on this, but as I understand it, the sort of late period of Taiwan's what's the word? Period of martial law, authoritarian rule. There were beginnings of free expression before the switch over to democracy, and I don't know if he was writing in that period or during the early democratic period, but the story in this book Zero follows a guy who's getting involved in sort of, I think, liberal or lefty progressive dissenting politics, and he finds it quite frustrating. So the story critiques everyone on the spectrum, despite probably being pro freedom, at least in the sense that it's trying to write about politics. And you do get there's a similar thing in Zero, I think, where even dissent against the system is dissatisfactory, because what can it really do? So there's, I don't know, I wouldn't call it nihilism, but there's a sort of a suspicion that it's all a bit useless, trying to bring about a really fundamental change as an individual person. Because I think that's the thing that's worth mentioning in Zero, is that when the guy tries teaming up with a group, it's rubbish. It does nothing. He's stuck on his own, alienated and isolated.
And he also doesn't really succeed, right? It's like a good, like, kind of realist lesson in like, you do need a group. You can't just lone wolf against the system, which we get a lot more in Western lit, right? It's like, especially in America, like, oh, you can, like, one man can defeat the whole system, and it's not very realistic bend. So I also see a lot of the, like, the kind of the push and pull here of like individualism versus society and groups helping to overthrow tyranny versus the individual trying, but you also are getting a little bit of like cognitive dissonance in Zero about there not really being a good answer for that. It's not, I don't think it's strongly pushing for like individualism, nor is it strongly pushing for this kind of like utopian ideal either. I guess because the utopian ideal here is more authoritarian than it is socialist. So that would be maybe that would be his answer.
Yeah, I wonder if listeners who haven't read the story are now itching for us to tell them what sort of authoritarian regime it is, because we haven't said we've said the origins are murderous and racist, but we haven't said if it's a communist system, a nationalist system. So, like, how would you guys characterize the system that Shida is living under?
I would say it's I mean, the thing it reminds me most of is like what Plato in his Republic says is the ideal society. It's like basically like the smartest people are in charge, and they are sort of self-appointed philosopher kings. But then it's sort of taken to the nth degree, in which they're also sort of committing genocide against anyone who they don't think belongs in their in-group. Slowly, there's the initial mass genocide and then sort of ongoing. They just keep doing that. Yeah.
It's very interesting how it feeds into automation, that's an ongoing trend where more and more people are no longer essential to the economy. And I guess in our world, they have to find something else to work in, become more economically marginalized. Whereas in Zero, it's a bit more simple. They get replaced by machines, and then they get carted off somewhere or vaporized, possibly. They just get eliminated. So the end, it's quite, you could say it's a lovely minimalist system where the end goal is to strip away everyone the system doesn't need. And it's even hinted at that people in the capital working on their computers don't really need to be there, because the computers are usually better at doing their tasks automatically as well.
Oh yeah, and I was just gonna say there's some like unreliability about, you think we don't really get a wrapped up answer at the end as to like who's really controlling things. I don't want to, you can spoil it if you want to, but I don't want to do it. But the, like, we don't really know. I think it's always such an interesting, take. I feel like it's not here. We kind of have an excuse for why, and that there's some sort of explanation, but I feel like that the idea that like computers take over everyone's jobs, and can take over their personalities and can take over running everything. It's kind of a appealing. There's kind of an appealing reason here, but it always, whenever I read this in stories, it always makes me feel like, okay, but who wrote the programs and who's doing it? You know, like there's got to be in this paradigm. There's no kind of AI, so someone has to be the person who's smart enough to make sure the computers run. You know, so there was kind of a lack there for me.
I guess it's like a lot of old sci-fi. Some of the technology is eerily accurate to where we are today. Like people are able to pay by bleeping their wrist over a little pay scanner, and like here in the UK, that's essentially how I pay for stuff. Do it through my phone. I beep my phone. In the PRC, it's more or less the same with a QR code. So like that is pretty much a spot on prediction of where the tech was going. But yeah, on the other hand, no one's got smartphones. The internet doesn't really seem to be a thing. But on the other hand, there is mentions of I think there's mentions of like wireless technology. So like some things aren't fleshed out, which is technology wise, which is probably a good move by the author, because if he tried to flesh them out, we could be more clear cut and say this guy was stupid. He got it completely wrong. Whereas like, yeah, the technology isn't spelled out. Here's a question. Could either of you be persuaded to live in this society?
No, absolutely not. It's destroyed all the good things about human society.
They've got bars and video games.
Yeah, and like weird sex islands, but like, no, they don't have any actual, no one's doing any creative stuff. I don't know, all the things that I normally hate about dystopian worlds, he successfully made me hate this one. The thing I love about the world is everybody trying to figure out what they're going to make of their lives. And in this like rigorous controlled society, it's 100% loss. So no, I'm out. I quit. No sex islands for me.
To point of order, it's a sex, the entire country of Brazil,
which is a big country,
not an island. I don't know. I mean, I also think no, but it's interesting to me to see there's like the idea that we struggle to advance and progress as societies and come to a place where we're more comfortable, and then we see fiction like this and it's like everyone's super comfortable, you don't have to think or struggle really, and then you're still like, yeah, but I don't like that either. So, perhaps the purpose in the struggle a little bit, or the purpose in meaningful work that you're choosing for yourself and for and learning from a place of comfort, of material comfort, of resources, is maybe perhaps the more appropriate utopia, where there's still an intellectual struggle and spiritual struggle, but not material.
I think it's interesting what you mentioned about there being material comfort, and that people don't need to think too much about, like, I don't know, say politics. They don't need to think about politics. If you compare that with 1984 is a much more totalitarian system in that everyone has to love Big Brother. Everyone's not allowed to forget about the nation's enemies, the ideology in whatever form it exists. The ideology, forget what it's called, like English socialism or something, some bullshit name. Whereas you might say that Zero has a little bit more in common with our neoliberal postmodern society in that it is a little bit like a consumer society. You can go to the bar, you can play a video game, if you're in the wealthy central core. You're not obliged to engage in politics, although you can't. It's fair to say. So to me, it kind of felt like a blend of 1984 and Brave New World.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys have read that one.
Totally.
Minus the drugs. There are like weird sex orgies in Brave New World, but there's also happy pills. Whereas
they got the Soma.
No. Yeah, Soma. I don't think there's any happy pills in Zero, but there is Brazil. So you guys mentioned that, which is like a corporate retreat for white collar workers who are beginning to feel disillusioned. They ship them off to like a holiday resort where you get paired up with a host, a guide slash sex partner, I guess. And yeah, that's a bit of the book that kind of woke me up a bit because I thought it was going to be a completely sexless story, but it's actually that activity that helps wake up Shida, because at the end of it, it becomes like a hookup. That his guide says, "No, you need to forget about me," but of course he goes back and he can't. And I seem to recall, I've not actually read 1984, I've only seen the film, but I believe a big part of the Winston's rebellion is that he dares to fall in love with a woman, and their love is actually really tied in with their, at first quietly, then more overtly, sticking it to Big Brother.
Correct.
Whereas Shida, he's not sticking it to his boss by falling in love. It's more that he was forced into having a fling when he really didn't want a fling. He wanted something a bit more substantial.
And he has his other girlfriend who doesn't really, she's part of the society, so he can't like talk to her about anything, emotional or about his rebellion and like what's going on inside him. He just can hang out with her. But it also bears mentioning, I think, that the Brazil kind of like sex vacation romp is for the top tier guys. Remember that boss keeps telling him that. He's like, Niagara Falls is like a low tier vacation. You're going on a high tier one. So there still is like an element of the capitalism in whoever, that performs higher at a better job gets to go on the good vacations, and the other people don't get to go on vacation, or they get to go on the worst vacations. So there's still an element of like the stratosphere of socioeconomic class in the reward system.
Yeah, there is some kind of a bizarre social mobility. You see people moving up and moving down, but whether or not you move up or down seems to be largely about how much you buy into the whole system.
Yeah, it's like party loyalty,
right?
Or committee loyalty, I guess.
Which to me is very 1984. That part of it is like
right.
It still has the core kind of. It's a different way of looking at it, but it has the core feel.
Yeah, and I can kind of see that in the modern workplace. How much enthusiasm do you project about how happy you are to be in your job and be in the office? It's not like that gets you promoted, but I'm sure it helps.
Right.
I'll keep us moving along. I guess we've talked quite a lot about allusions to Orwell. We've talked about the dystopia. I'll ask you guys a question as the Hugonauts. Would you put this thing in the runnings for a Hugo Award?
Well, so I guess let me say two things. One, I don't read that many novellas, and there's a whole Hugo category for novellas, so I can't say to that. Right. I'm not an expert on who's getting nominated for novellas. On the flip side, I would say I don't think it would get nominated today. Stylistically, we talked a little bit earlier about how it felt. So there was a big change in sort of the 40s and 50s where they started. The idea became you shouldn't like reveal your world by just telling us how things work. You should do it like hidden through the exposition of the story. As things happen to the characters, you learn more about the world they live in and how it all works. And that's like a very hard and fast rule now in sci-fi. Like it's not really allowed to be like a good sci-fi book if you don't do that. And Zero doesn't do that. Zero just like tells you how it all works, and you get like big chunks of exposition basically throughout the book that explain how things are working. So I think it's kind of like breaking what we've decided is like a cardinal rule of sci-fi, which doesn't mean it's not entertaining though. But yeah, I think that's sort of my like whatever Hugo critique take on it.
I think it's kind of a cardinal rule of lit or film or any storytelling is like show don't tell. I think it just used to be a lot more common to have, these big expository chunks like you're saying. I think it totally could win a retroactive. Like if they retroactively say, I feel like it totally would be something I could have seen winning in the 80s. And it's still totally worth reading. And I feel like if it were more in the zeitgeist, people would have read it already and like know Zero as like a classic sci-fi novella. I agree with Brent. I think it does feel a little dated, but also it's older. So, if you read it with that framework, that mindset, then, like alongside reading some older dystopian stuff, I feel like it's totally valid and hangs with it quite nicely. But yeah, novella, like a modern, I'm trying to think of like a really great, like Arrival, Ted Chiang, that obviously feels like a much more defined, like that's a much more modern science fiction story to me. I'm sorry, not Arrival, Stories of Your Life. Arrival's the movie.
Yes. Stories of
I
Your
couldn't
Life.
have forgiven myself if we'd hung up and I hadn't corrected that.
Yeah, we'd have to have like a very obviously edited, with like weird background noise. Stories of Your Life.
Yeah, the punch in. What do you think about? I mean, I know you're not maybe you're not as concerned with or tuned into the like award thing, but what do you think of the story in general? Like,
I guess I'm in the orbit enough to get blocked by a Twitter account that I never interacted with. It's all about the Hugos. Easily done, maybe. I learned about the Hugos through my contact with Chinese sci-fi. I think I remember hearing at first that one of the things that helped Three Body break through was a Hugo Award, I think. And there's another. If you start looking into translated Chinese sci-fi, one of the other texts that you will run into very quickly, I think, is a novelette. It's described as called "Folding Beijing" by Huang Fan. I don't know if you guys heard of that one?
No.
Yeah, so I don't. Do you know? Does the Hugos have a novelette category or just novella, novel, short story?
Just the three.
Okay, so that probably won in the novel category, or the novella category, or maybe short story. And that is also kind of dystopia. It's more ambiguous. It's about a version of Beijing. We're not really told like who's running it per se, but we can assume it's just the Beijing municipality in the PRC. But it's a new kind of city where it is set up so that it's always running, but different. There's 3 different tiers. So there's an elite tier of Beijing where people get X number of hours and they sort of run the high level, high class and political aspects of society. Then they all go to sleep, and the middle class part of Beijing unfolds and activates, and it's all the white collar workers, younger professionals. And then the people with the least number of hours are the underclass who do all the shitty work. And there's plenty of that in China. And there's plenty of it in the story. And the story follows a guy who's not trying to overthrow the system, but he's just on a mission to deliver a message up to the top tier. So he's like crawling through the machinery and
super cool.
Yeah, mixing with people he's never mixed with before. And I think on one hand that got a prize because translated Chinese sci-fi, I think, was in vogue with the Hugos at the time. I believe the Sad Puppies controversy was going on around the time that Three Body and Folding Beijing were doing well. So there was all this controversy over diversity. So perhaps it's a bit cynical, but it's an opinion I've heard from a few people that helped these authors from outside the US get the prize. But even if it did, I think Folding Beijing is a great story because it does something very new and different. It looks at politics in China, but it doesn't look at it from the typical angle you get in the West, which is that China equals North Korea, China bad, China is irredeemable, and the only interesting people are dissidents, and that gets quite tiresome quite fast. It's like reading in your comfort zone as a Westerner, I think. So as a story that works quite nicely as a story, I think it has a bit of info dumping exposition, but not too much. It's quite zoomed in on this one guy, and it has a real heart to it, because it points out the fact that there is a class structure. It works as a nice metaphor for not just China, but pretty much everywhere in the world, every developed and developing society. It's an interesting commentary on careers, cities. There's a lot to talk about in regards to it, really. And Zero, I think, is similar, but I think it's a little bit more flat. I think on my reread, Zero was way more interesting. I started to think, I was paying more attention to the story about Nanning and how strange and ambiguous that is, because you're only told that. I think it's not actually straightforward exposition as to what Nanning and the foundation of the new society is,
No.
because all the info you get is secondhand, not necessarily reliable. You have to do some reading between the lines. Like, you're told the guy who founded it is Swiss. Why you get some version of why he became important, but it's never spelled out 100%. You're told that there are what am I trying to say? Recordings of cities around the world being struck or having their nuclear weapons detonated by something in the sky with a US military or something or government logo on it is happening. So to me, like, it was less simplistic than I thought first time around, but I think the thing that would kill it for me might be the prose. I don't think it reads that nicely. I was noticing clunky sentences that another edit or another draft might have fixed. So I think for that reason, I would give that one to Hao Qingfang and Fold in Beijing rather than Huang Fan and Zero. That's my take. I know that was a long take, but
that's great. I'm definitely going to read that. I love the idea of what a simple thing like passing a message along can be, how it can be hampered, and the kind of the conflicts that can arise from trying to navigate a very class-tiered society just for something as simple as delivering a message. That sounds really, really interesting. And I also agree. I think one of the most interesting things about Zero was the unreliable, that we get kind of like three narratives for how this world was creative, and not one of them is reliable. And you really never have a solid understanding of the real history and the truth behind it. And it feels like that feeling makes sense in the world that Zero takes place in. Like, you could really never know what's behind everything. Maybe even the people at the top don't know, because they edit their own history so much.
And do we want to talk about how the X-Files stole all its ideas from this novella? The alien takeover of society.
I've never seen the X-Files, so I didn't know that.
Oh, right. The premise of the X-Files, well, this, I think it becomes more and more clear over time, but the big conspiracy in the X-Files is that the aliens are already here. They've infiltrated the US and maybe other world governments by sinister means. And we meet a character who sort of basically poses that theory to Shida. He says, look, you've seen flying saucers in the sky, right? And right at the start of the book, it's a very weird opening. We meet Shida's parents rather than Shida, and his dad is watching these flying saucers fly about. And I think we're kind of, it seems at that time that the flying saucers are being piloted by humans, and it's something that he wants his son to become a flying saucer pilot. And there's even a bit where his wife comes in and says, but she says something like, "I've got a wonderful surprise for you. It's what you've always dreamed of." And she think, in her mind, it's that he's always wanted a kid, but really, all his fantasies are about these flying saucers, and he has to pretend that it's not. When she tells him, "Oh, we've been allowed to have a child," which, by the way, that to me that had to be an allusion to the one-child policy in China, the sort of the reproductive control of reproductive freedoms. But yeah, so we're introduced to the flying saucers early on, and it just seems like a throwaway thing. And I had remembered it as a throwaway thing, but I think late in the book, Shida meets a dissident who tells him, actually, the whole thing is ancient aliens who, like, I think they seeded life on Earth. They tried to guide us. They had become stranded on Earth, and they tried to guide us as a civilization to get to the point where we could build technology that could take them home. But they found they needed to intervene, because it's often mentioned in the book that in the 20th century, everything goes to shit. We start ruining the planet, nuclear bombing each other, and something needed to be changed. So according to this theory, that's why the aliens set up Nanning and developed this much more micromanaging totalitarian society. And then right at the end of the book, Shida believes this crazy theory. And it's never actually told to us whether the people in control really are aliens in human disguise or not. Because they tell him, look, you've been brainwashed into this stupid theory about aliens. That's ridiculous. But Shida, right to the end, is thinking, you can't fool me. And on my first read, I think I was maybe trying to get through it a bit too quickly. I sort of dismissed it as another undeveloped idea by the author. But on my reread, I thought, wow, that's quite a frightening ambiguity. Because we are told that the current leader of the whole society hasn't been seen for like for decades. So we don't really know how old he is.
Or they see him, but he looks the same for over 30 years. So he's never changing his appearance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was, I don't know, it worked better for me on a reread as like a sophisticated story and quite subtle.
Totally. And weirdly, an early uplift tale, right? The uplifting of humanity.
Right. Yeah, there's I don't know if it's transhumanist ideas, but we're told, I think by the authorities and by the dissidents, that they are trying to like create some perfect society. So I don't know so much about the history of sci-fi, but was that a novel thing at the time?
Uplift was fairly nascent, and uplift being that the idea of like grafting intelligence and faster evolution towards intelligence on like other animal species and like lesser intelligent beings, and that, I mean, David Brin kind of took that to a new level with his Uplift series in the 80s, 83, 84, 85. And so that, it was kind of a nascent idea, but it's kind of cool to see that as like the description of humanity starting, like the creation myth retold as aliens crash landed here rather than anything else.
And so the final scene, and I guess we are going to spoilers, there's this big face on the screen that's sort of berating Shida, and the ways that its facial expressions are described as sort of contorting from anger into a smile very quickly and then remaining very still, it just worked to me on so many levels. Is it that the guy has been completely dehumanized? He's a representation of this hyper-rational system? Is he some kind of transhuman figure who has ascended above all earthly concerns? Or is he literally just an alien disguised as a human or projecting a human face onto a screen? It worked for me way better than a lot of, like, I don't know, like the Sex Island chapter of the novel, or like him, the more mundane stuff, like him consoling his drunk friend. I was like, whoa, this is quite sinister.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it didn't really feel sinister to me a lot of the time. It felt more sort of like I was supposed to read it as an allegory and not much else.
Yeah, sinister and also kind of confusing. A great novella, because in a novel you'd kind of expect some sort of, you'd feel a little disappointed if you didn't have some sort of conclusion, like, okay, this is what was behind it, like some sort of answer. But novellas and short stories can end wonderfully with a ton of mystery still, and that's the feeling. You're satisfied with that feeling, like, oh, well, we just don't know, and I've experienced this thing.
I had a question here. It's a real nothing question, because I think we've been talking about all this more or less since we started, but it was, as a piece of speculative fiction, what can we analyze and interpret? Is there anything we've not sort of tried to interpret ourselves yet that you guys jumped to as you were reading?
I don't think so. I think we've talked about all the big sort of ideas that jumped out at me. I don't know. What do you think, Cody? We missed anything?
Not that I can think of right now. I think we got most of it. The technology analysis, what actually is accurate, what's not accurate, and then also the political ramifications.
One thing I did do to help me here was I've taken all the bits in the ebook that I highlighted, and I've got them in front of me. So I'll just try and pick one out that might be interesting to go through. So here's one. So he finds some metal, but he's been given some kind of metal item by the his guide, in quote marks, from the Sex Island, and it says he lifted it and stroked the idol and thought of the word Christian. The old history professor had once mentioned the religion in class, saying that it had had the greatest influence of any religion in the history of human civilization. At its zenith, it counted half of the world's population among its faithful. It was hard to believe that humanity could worship something so amorphous, And even so, Christianity was unable to relieve the afflictions of humankind. By the end of the 20th century and the commencement of the Third Industrial Revolution, its partial opposition to science and progress were its downfall. I mean, I could analyze this a bit, but do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Brent, what you got?
Yeah, Mabel. Hey, Mabel.
Mabel has some thoughts.
Mabel, hush.
Brent's dog.
Okay, Mabel.
I would say I think that Mabel.
Mabel, that was very rude.
Sorry, there's a lady selling tamales out in the street outside, which you maybe also can hear. I would say that I think he's trying to sort of make a commentary on sort of the slow decline of religion in like advanced economies. And, you know, it's interesting. We just see that sort of going two ways. In many ways, it feels like religion is disappearing. And in other ways, it feels like it's like more and more powerful in our lives and like taking more and more control over aspects of our society. So,
speak for yourself.
You know, well, at least in the
secular
US.
England over here.
Yeah.
Speak for ourselves, indeed.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of like, it kind of feels like a sci-fi author's take on religion, which is like, oh, well, once the science gets good enough, everybody's going to let that go for sure, right? It's like, well, I'm actually not sure that's what people are getting out of religion. But anyway, yeah.
Right.
I think
so. The thing I latched onto here. Oh, sorry, Cody.
Oh, I was just gonna say real quickly. I think we see this in a lot of science fiction. There's this kind of like flopping back and forth balance of which to me means like tells me there should be some sort of balance. That's just what I believe. But the like sometimes in science fiction we see like, okay, we need to let go of the individual and spiritualism and religion and get more towards science. And that's like the goal of a book or the point a book's trying to make. And then sometimes we see the opposite, which is like, okay, organizing a completely secular society kills the human spirit. And we need more freedom in individual expression. And there's a ton of books that make really good points at both, either end of the spectrum. And I think this one has a fairly good balance.
Yeah. One thing I don't know so much about Taiwan under the KMT was how secular or not it was, because obviously post-communist revolution China is an officially atheist state, and until relatively, well, I guess until the 80s, it wasn't great to be, religion was a no-go. It was the old society, it was a no-go in the PRC, but in Taiwan, I don't know if the right-wing government was secular and not interested in any, challenge to its thought, its nationalistic thought that, say, Buddhism or Taoism might pose. So I profess ignorance there. I do think it's interesting that, so the KMT's roots were much more sort of lefty. It was a broader church than the Communist Party. But it was the first Chinese revolution that overthrew the last dynasty. The Qing was, broadly speaking, secular, rational, liberal, or lefty, all the way through to like communist and anarchist. It was a broad church of that wing of politics. But sort of as the decades wore on, and once it became the party of government, it became more right-wing, more authoritarian, more conservative. It never implemented democracy. And then by the time it's on Taiwan, it's just a right-wing dictatorship. So, but what it maybe does have as a through line is some kind of a secularism. It's not like, it's not trying to implement, like, so let's say like Japan in World War II. It's not, I don't think it was trying to implement a state religion. Its big thing was, as far as I'm aware, it's just pure nationalism. Anyway, changing tack slightly, the phrase that I latched onto in that quote was Third Industrial Revolution. And that's partly because on my own job, in a trade magazine for the pharmaceutical industry, I did an interview with an technology expert on the Industry 4.0, so the fourth industrial revolution. And I wanted to clarify before I wrote that thing up. Hang on, what were the first three? Because I didn't really know. So the first industrial revolution, that's probably what you'd think. That's like steam power machines that can do the job of first 3 people instead of 1, then 5. So it's the first sort of replacement of people, hand labor with machines. and the first factories. And then the second industrial revolution, that's Fordism, basically. That's the big production line factory. So it's even more standardization, bigger scale, and also the sort of worker-employer relationship that goes with it. The third industrial revolution is computers, basically, the entrance of digital technology and IT. And then we're living in the fourth one right now, which is internet, smart devices, the Internet of Things, AI, the next level of automation. And that line in this book actually made me think, yeah, this is interesting because it gives us a computerized society that it wasn't really quite able to see the world we live in now, the world of smartphones. So it's the sort of logic of computerization taken all the way, which is maybe would explain why the humanities are gone. So philosophy's gone, literature is gone, the study of history, well, it can't be completely gone because the guy's got a history teacher, but all those things that make life worth living, that make us want to reject living in this world are gone, but also religion's gone. And I think, I don't know about you guys, but for me, being an educated, somewhat left-leaning person who's interested in lit, I feel that religion is a funny one because I wouldn't really want to live in a hyper-rationalistic world where the engineers are in control. My friends are engineers back home in Dundee where I'm from, and I'd never put them in charge of society. So although I've long since given up on any kind of organized religion, I was going to church first 12 years of my life, I feel that they're sort of in my camp because they're not maybe the humanities, but that is culture. That's human culture. So I don't feel like they're an enemy either. I feel like they're probably closer to what I'm educated in than my friends with their engineering degrees.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was talking about with the balance earlier of like, I think most science fiction authors would like, just based on my readings of so many books, are kind of like, yeah, we should try for some sort of balance between the two, because obviously none of us, we don't want to crush our spiritual existential quest, and admitting we don't know things, and the exploration of like the human spirit, but we also don't want to be ruled by non-fact based religious doctrine.
Yeah, you wouldn't want them in charge either.
Yeah.
A funny thing I noticed on my job is that a big part of it is I do an interview, I feed the interview into an AI, a voice-to-text AI, so it produces a transcript. I edit the transcript into a Q&A article. So a lot of the corporate speak I have to translate into what I think is good grammar, good English. And Google, I do everything in Google Docs, and Google Docs will often help me. It'll put the grammar underline if there's weird grammar. And one thing Google Docs does not like is when people say the science. If you say follow the science, Google will say no. The science is not a thing. You have to say follow scientific procedures.
It almost sounds religious, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It is its own doctrine.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think to the credit of the evil rulers of Zero, it does seem like a fairly rational society, quite rationally organized, except for the fact that the work seems to be there as a means to control. It's never really clear what purpose most people are serving in their jobs, like what exactly it, like Shida seems to be working at the Bureau of Bureaucracy. What he's actually doing is irrelevant. The point is he's in his desk not causing trouble for 8 hours of the day.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that just like so fundamentally irked me about their society is exactly the point about you're making about like they feel like it's rational, but I think my basic worldview is like, who are you to say what the right thing is? And this is just like the committee of people who've decided they know the way the world should be and are like setting out to make that happen, and they don't care, they're perfectly happy to kill like the majority of the population to make that happen. Obviously they're taking it to the umpteenth degree, but just the basic fundamental underpinning of that's like, oh, we've got it all figured out.
What's rational and what's right aren't always the same.
Yeah, who's to say?
I had an incident, that makes it sound a bit dire. There was an exchange at work recently where my colleague found a paper that showed up in his inbox about a scientist who was studying the heads of woodpeckers to find out whether they were more like a rigid hammer or a sponge. And a guy, I hope he's not listening, but a guy from marketing looked at that and said, huh? People are actually spending their working lives studying these things, but what's the ROI on that? And I was like, why does everything need to have an ROI, man? Not everything can be quantified, and that's why you need more than reason, because reason it may be rational, but it doesn't encompass what we're on the planet for.
Or perhaps you can corporatize, you could say there's a spiritual ROI or an existential ROI like to it that's not quantifiable.
I said to him, not everything can be measured in numbers, and he said, but it doesn't sound like much fun. And I stopped myself there, but I was like, okay, that's your binary, money and fun. You'd fit in quite nicely in Zero or Brave New World, if that's your binary. But
yeah, or Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, there is spirit in Las Vegas. There's lots of chapels, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's
That's true.
There's humanity. There's a lot of humanity as well.
Lots of them.
Yeah. I'm sorry I took it over, but I have nothing to. That was great. I like the woodpecker.
I got to jump in like 15 minutes. Just
okay.
Heads up.
Right. In that case, I'll speed us along. I'll just take us to the miscellaneous section. I think we've had a pretty good chat about the big ideas in the book. So the first question or topic in the miscellaneous section is the Chinese word of the day, and usually I fob that off to my guest, who is usually fluent in Chinese, which I'm not. But today it's on me. So my word is li. So Chinese is a very homophonic language. So because it has tones, there are lots of different li's. This one is this is the tone I can do the most easily. This is the third tone, which goes down then up. So this would be li, and this li means reason. So you can probably see why I've picked it. When I popped it into my dictionary, I knew it's the right sort of version of the word reason, because as a noun it can mean reason, truth, science, natural science, texture, logic, and as a verb it can mean to manage, to run, tidy, to tidy up, to handle, to pay attention to put in order, intrinsic order. And I think that kind of sums up the world of Zero. It's very, very, very much focused on order and rationalistic, controlling micromanagement, which you might say has something in common with the 21st century PRC, but taken to a crazy, crazy, crazy extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll speed us along again.
Okay.
So the next miscellaneous item is a piece of music that you would pair the story with. So if you were making a movie, what would be the soundtrack? I do think this could make a decent movie. It felt kind of cinematic to me. I have one ready, but do you guys have anything that springs to mind?
Well, I agree with yours. The porcupine tree. I was thinking just vaguely of prog metal as a genre, like anything very like kind of mathy and futury sounding, like Polyphia or Animals as Leaders, if you want to get heavy.
Oh.
With
Animals
it.
as Leaders is good.
Yeah, prog metal, the new stuff, heavy instrumentals.
Right. Brent, does anything spring to mind for you?
I don't think I had a good one on this. Cody's our musical expert, so I'll let that one stand.
Okay, I think Animals as Leaders is good because it's kind of. I've only listened to the first album, but it's very technically impressive. But it feels kind of, I don't know if dry is the right word, but it doesn't conjure big aesthetic visions in my head. And I feel like maybe another reason I might not give the Hugo to this book is it was hard for me to work out what the aesthetic appearance of the world of Zero would be, apart from kind of bland. Like, it didn't seem like it would have cool cyberpunk neon lighting. It didn't seem like it was going to look like a Soviet propaganda painting or a Nazi rally. everything seemed very blank. And I think technical, techie prog metal can have that quality where it's a little bit not robotic, but bloodless.
Yeah, it doesn't have as much of
Nice.
an emotional quality without lyrics.
Right. Yeah. My choice is a little bit more bloody or weepy. It's the track Way Out of Here from an album that would fit the whole thing, basically. Fear of a Blank Planet by Porcupine Tree. And I only thought of this because Cody, before we hit record, you suggested prog metal. And this is my favorite prog metal rock band. And they were at the forefront of my mind recently because Kaiser Kuo, who's the host of the Cynical podcast, is a big fan of these guys, and he mentioned in the most recent episode they've got a new album coming out. But Way Out of Here is the track in this concept album about looking for a way out. And I guess Fear of a Blank Planet is kind of about this third industrial revolution. It's about depressed teenagers in the UK, basically, who are not paying attention to school, addicted to, I guess, not their smartphones, but their mobile phones, their Xboxes, TV, pills. They're depressed, and yeah, they're looking for any kind of way out. And that's what this track is about. And although it's Way Out of Here, it probably would mean in terms of the concept album, like getting on the bus out of your shitty northern suburban town. But it does feel like in the emotional level, like some kind of an escape from a dystopian society. So that's why I've picked that one. I had a bonus question. So I snipped these out and put them on the show's Patreon. I think we've kind of already talked about this, but the question is, how real is the dystopia? Like, how much of a threat as a possible future do you think this could be? What do you guys think?
Cool.
What else?
All right, well, anything else you're talking
Yeah,
about?
what else we got?
Yeah, the further reading questions. Yes, if listeners want more like this book, where would you send them? You're fired if you say 1984.
Well, what else do you say? I mean, other dystopian stuff. Handmaid's Tale, Brave New World, Machine Stops. We just did an audiobook recording of that on our podcast. We did like a cast audiobook recording, the E.M. Forster book.
Yeah, full cast. It was fun. And it's, very dystopian future. The committee is in charge. Sort of the committee, sort of the machine. Anyway. But yeah, I mean, this is just like, feels like the it's that era for sure. So 1984, I'll say it.
You're fired.
We've said it a few times. I can't believe you haven't read it. You really should, Angus. It's so good. It's like, there's a reason. It's the most popular sci-fi book of all time by like quite a margin. If you look on Goodreads, and it's for a good reason. That book is
it's the writing's
good.
incredible too. Definitely read it. It's easy. It's quick.
Okay, well, I'll ping pong back then with another Orwell recommendation, Homage to Catalonia, just because it's awesome. That's a lovely one. But being more serious, I guess I must have read a fair number of sci-fi dystopias, but I'll just reiterate, if anyone listening to the pod's not read Folding Beijing, it's fab.
I'm going to go read it right now.
You can read it online for free at Uncanny Magazine's website. So if you just Google Folding Beijing, that should be like the top or the second result. And it's a novelette. I don't know what the standard word count of a novelette is, but it's like a long short story. So it won't be over in a blink, but you could read it in a day, easy peasy.
nice.
Lovely. And the final question, what are you guys reading just now?
Well, we are...
I just started...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Cody, go
All
first.
right. Thank you for being the judge, Angus.
You needed the authoritarian leader to step in for
exactly. We are trying to read all of the Hugo nominees for this year, so we can talk about them before the Hugo is announced. I have read everyone except I am working on right now The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers, who's kind of described as like a hope punk author. It's very sci-fi, lots of aliens, but like good vibes, good feelings. It's very positive. And then Brent, you have one more left too, right?
I'm doing Project Hail Mary. Yeah. That's the last one on my list to get through all the Hugos for this year. So yeah, then we can sort of do our ranking and talk about who we think we should win. There's a couple books that I've really, really liked that I think will be fun this year. So anyway, we don't need to talk about that now, but yeah, that's where I'm in Andy Weir.
Okay. And I'm reading, funnily enough, some Chinese sci-fi, sort of. It's AI 2041 by Chen Qiufan and Kai-Fu Lee. Have you guys come across this one at all?
No.
Right. Have you come across Waste Tide, Chen Qiufan's debut novel?
No, I haven't heard of him.
It's available to read in English. Let me see. I think Kai-Fu Lee is from Taiwan, actually, but works in Beijing in AI companies. And he's got a book out called AI Superpowers, which is comparing AI in the PRC and in the US. Chen Qiufan is a straight up sci-fi writer who's got a lot of stuff translated to English you can read. He's from Guangdong province in China. And AI 2041 is a collaboration by them both, where each chapter starts with a short story by Chen Qiufan that looks at the premise of the story is something to do with a likely AI technology that will be in place by 2041. And then Kai-Fu Lee follows up each of those stories with his analysis on or an explanation of that technology. And to me, it's sort of relevant to Zero because a very easy way to criticize it is that it imports a lot of sort of optimistic, I'm going to say the word again, neoliberal business mindset to what technology is going to do for our society, while sort of paying lip service to, but ignoring a lot of the problems and contradictions and scary possibilities and failures it could face. So it's very, I don't know, like, I've only recently moved to a trade magazine where business is framed as the thing that's wonderful and it's going to change the world. But it is sort of weird to see fiction sci-fi, which to me is supposed to be a vehicle for criticism in my English undergrad humanities brain mind, sort of flying the flag almost for these new technologies. Although to balance that complaint, I would say the stories are dramas, so they often do point at frightening or strange things about the technologies, but it does feel like a weird blend. So that's my criticism, but the upside is it's like no other book you'll ever read, I think. I can't think of any other book that's taken this approach. And it is quite interesting to see what this guy Kai-Fu Lee reckons is within the realms of possibility within our lifetimes. I guess we'll find out if he's right. That's another upside of the book. It will have a payoff in 2041. We can find out if he's a genius or a charlatan.
Yeah, putting an actual date in your book is always a bold strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. I also have one other quick one, which is if watching something, the show Severance on Apple Plus, which I just finished and is amazing. There's a lot of similarity with Zero, especially in like the work stuff, but it's like one of the best sci-fi shows I've ever seen, and the writing and everything's incredible about it. It's a perfect show. Go watch it.
That's on my list, that one.
Oh, it should be.
I know you have to go soon, Brent, but the word Severance has appeared, and we're talking about Chinese lit. Have you guys heard of a novel by a Chinese-American author called Ling Ma, also called Severance?
Have not.
Yeah, that is mental. So she wrote that, I guess a year or two before the pandemic, I think 2018, so before coronavirus had showed up in Wuhan. And it is about a plague, admittedly a fungal plague, not a virus, that emerges from China, spreads across the world, and it's from the perspective of this Chinese-American office worker who's in a publishing company in New York. So you see from the office window she's in, you see the arrival of this plague in New York and how society reacts to it. And then the other half is the post-apocalyptic world, which obviously we don't live in. But it is really eerie, from things like lockdown, virtual working, and also societal reactions like partying in the face of death. It's very strange that that book came out a year or two before the pandemic.
Kind of like Station 11.
I don't know about Station 11.
Similar thing. I'll tell you about it after. Yeah.
Okay.
The virus starts in Central Asia, not China, but yeah, close.
The damn Kazakhstanis did it.
Very close. The Georgians.
The Georgians. All right. Okay. Yeah, I actually don't read that much diaspora writing from the Chinese diaspora because it's if it's written in English first, can't do it on the podcast. So
yeah,
from a rationalistic point of view, it's a waste of my time.
Right. We're in a similar. We understand the rationalism because similar deal. It's like we're constantly reading. I don't even watch that much TV or movies anymore. It's just like all reading all the time and specifically what we're covering.
This is why I love short stories and novellas.
Yeah,
that's one episode, and a novel is just one episode. So rationally, why would I ever do a novel?
Just do some
Or
Ted
you could read the 1,400 pages of the Mars trilogy and do one episode.
All right. Oh boy.
Oh, Kim. Okay, cool.
All right. I think that's all for me. At least I have no more questions to grill you fellas with. Is there anything we've not said yet that you'd like to say?
No, I think we've hit it all. This was really fun. Thank you so much for having us on. This was great to talk about something new. Learned a lot. It was great to sort of hear your perspective on things. And yeah, it was just a great experience. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, you opened a world to us, and I'm excited to check out a lot of these recommendations and start getting into it. And we are excited to have you as a guest on the Hugonauts at some point soon in the future.
I'd like that very much, and I would like to learn more about the Hugos, if only because it has been so bound up with the arrival of Chinese sci-fi in the English book reading world. Like, it's brought up a lot, so for that reason alone, I'd love to be educated a bit more.
Awesome.
For sure.
On that note, I guess I'll say zaijian, which is Mandarin for goodbye.
Cool.
Zaijian?
I'll say adios, which is Californian.
Zaijian. What was Californian for goodbye?
Adios.
Spanish.
Adios. Yeah, Californian, right? All right, it's over. That's it. That's your lot. Thank you again, Hugonauts, for coming on. That was, as I said in the intro, really pretty good by the show standards, I think. I hope you listeners enjoyed it too. I'll just end the show on the plugs. First thing I'll say is, if you didn't know, every single episode I make gets its own artwork that I also make. It's effectively just a thumbnail to slap onto the YouTube uploads, but I also slap them on to the podcast episodes on the main site. So if you just go to the show's homepage, truetraffic.podbean.com, trchfic.podbean.com, you can see all the beautiful artworks there, and of course all the other goodies that I put up on there. So yeah, I know what I'm like. I rarely go to podcasts homepages unless they're my one favorite show in the world. But yeah, there is a lot of good stuff on the Trishafik homepage. So consider having a nosy. You'll find links straight to it in the show notes. Besides that, if you've got feedback on anything you've heard in any of the episodes, whether you want to add to something we said, you want to just clap and applaud and tell us how wonderful we are, you can do that. But also, if you've caught something that's not quite right, then I am not a person who gets mad when people point these things out. I like to learn. I'm, as I've said on the show, not an expert, so all of that is welcome. Good places to do that would be social media. I've got my own Twitter account you can reach out to at Angus Likes Words, and the show has its own Instagram at Trchfic, TRCHFIC. We also have a Discord as well that I'm hoping to one day turn into a bustling place of discussion. As it stands, it's quite quiet, but it is a way to, if you want to pose a question and have other fans of the show catch it before I do, potentially, then the Discord is a good place for that. So I think I'll just round it off there. One more thing, sorry, the show's Patreon. Yeah, I have a stream of bonus shows queued up. I'm going to be producing more pretty soon. There are dozen upon dozen upon dozen of bonus episodes already up there. It's mostly me solo talking either more about books covered on the show or books that don't quite qualify for the show. So like a non-fiction, for example, any China-related non-fiction I read, I get around to or immediately make a solo sort of rambling bonus waffle. So yeah, that's that. I guess I'll now just say the very best thing you can do for the show, you may well know by now, it's to spread the word. Tell your friend, tell your teacher, tell your boss, the guy that supervises your actually useless role in the computer-based authoritarian regime. Tell him. Tell the guy who you've joined the resistance with, but actually he's a plant agent there to monitor the resistance. Make sure you tell him everything you're doing, because he wants to know. He's got to fill in his reports. So on that hopefully pleasingly sinister note, 再见.